What up, you guys? Merry Christmas. This holiday season, I want to expose the classic It's a Wonderful Life. Now, first off, let me admit that It's a Wonderful Life is a classic. It is very aesthetically pleasing, and James Stewart absolutely crushes it as George Bailey. I even have to admit that the ending of the movie is very heartwarming and emotional. But the overall message of this movie is absolutely outrageous. The overarching theme of this movie is that George Bailey exists to make others happy. Notably, at the sacrifice of his own happiness, George never prioritizes his own life or ambitions. Hence why the plot is about a guardian angel named Clarence preventing George's suicide. Before I begin, I will note two moments where I think George acts nobly. The first part when George rescues his brother Harry at the cost of his own hearing in one ear. After all, George's brother is no good to him dead, and partial deafness is well worth the cost. The second part being when George alerts Mr. Gower that he accidentally filled someone's prescription with poison. Now, this is a noble move for a different reason. George saved an innocent person's life. However, it's more so justified that George saved his boss from prison and financial ruin. And you know what? Fuck Mr. Gower. He's a pharmacist and likewise has a responsibility to not fuck up prescriptions. That aside, I feel like lumping in these actions with George's adulthood decisions are disingenuous because George was not consciously sacrificing his own ambitions. Overall, George is constantly asked, or feels obligated, to sacrifice his own happiness. In the beginning, he's full of life and optimism. He's gonna be an architect and explore the world. But then his pops tragically kicks the bucket and George is pressured to take over the failing building and loan bank. Note that George resents banking, even so that he doesn't understand why his dad pursued it as a career, admitting that his dad is a terrible businessman. Unlike Mr. Potter, who knows that a bank cannot be operated on feels and good intentions. But George tells himself that it's only temporary, that his brother Harry will take over the building and loan after Harry graduates college. Except Harry has a nice job lined up in Buffalo after graduation. Okay, why is this George's problem? If Harry backs out of his promise to run the bank, then wouldn't the failure of the family legacy be on Harry's shoulders? Also, George saved Harry's fucking life and put his ass through college. If anything, Harry owes George a favor for once. But hey, apparently Harry's happiness is more important. So George returns to his miserable life of banking, which nearly goes out of business during a bank run. As we can see here, all of the patrons at the building and loan are selfish, ungrateful shits that care nothing for George or the community bank. In fact, they're totally willing to help the alleged villain, Mr. Potter, while letting the building and loan die so long as they get their money, forgetting that George is often lenient and forgiving on mortgage payments. George should have told all of these pieces of crap to go to hell and proceed to use his honeymoon money to further his ambitions. But instead, George sacrifices his honeymoon to continue his miserable career as a banker for a bunch of ungrateful losers who suck at paying their mortgage. No wonder why Potter hates these people so much. On the bright side, George manages some success in banking to the point where Mr. Potter offers to hire George and increase his pay by over 9 times. 9 times!
Good Lord! That's a lot of money!
The only trade-off is that George has to merge his bank with Potter's. And George refuses because of some distrust that Potter will gain control over the community. Okay. But you're gonna get paid, George! And Mr. Potter is a wise banker. Everyone would literally be better off if George agreed to this deal. But George says no. I'm gonna continue to do business with my incompetent Uncle Billy, who's gonna carelessly handle an $8,000 deposit that will jeopardize the family business that I made myself miserable to preserve. On a side note, in the alternative universe without George, doesn't Potterville look lit as fuck? Look at how hopping this place is. Man, thank goodness George Bailey was born to preserve Boredom Falls. Although I think the alternative universe is a bit disingenuous, because George's childhood heroics were not conscious decisions to sacrifice his own happiness, whereas his adult decisions were. An honest alternative view would be that George becomes a successful architect, gets rich doing so, Potterville lights up Bedford Falls, Harry probably figures his life out and still becomes a war hero as the two brothers financially care for their mother, while Uncle Billy is deservingly unemployed because he's a total dipshit. Seriously, Uncle Billy is such a putz. What bank in their right mind would hire this loser? And of course, the movie ends with a happy ending as the townsfolk come to the rescue with their charity. Gee, I'd sure hope so. George only bent over backwards his entire fucking life for these greedy bastards. And I guess George gets to live with a degree of satisfaction knowing that he helped Clarence get his wings and meant so much to so many people. But why are other people's happiness George's responsibility? The happiness of the townspeople and the Bailey family was never George's responsibility. The real tragedy of this movie is that George could have lived a happy, satisfying life to the point where he never once thought about jumping off a bridge. And to that I ask, am I to suffer and sacrifice just so that other people can smile? To hell with you, don't smile, I'm dying rich.